weekend that they realized that she was gone, the FBI should have immediately jumped in and taken over?
I think once this moved from a search posture to a possible kidnapping, the FBI, they're the premier agency in the world to deal with kidnappings. And that's something that our medium-sized law enforcement agency probably just doesn't have the experience to handle. We have 96 detectives, and they're very hardworking detectives, and they've been putting in very long hours each week since she's been missing.
Breaking tonight, Nancy Guthrie is gone. Across Pima County, this is no longer just a moment of grief. It has become a story filled with disturbing questions. The focus is no longer on who took her. The real question now is who failed her. How does an 84-year-old woman vanish from her own bedroom, leaving behind blood at the scene, a security camera torn from the wall, and a pacemaker signal that suddenly stops at exactly 2:28 a.m. And now, weeks later, there is still no arrest and no real answers. Tonight, a community is mourning, but it is also demanding the truth.
It's good that you have two agencies working together. It's a joint investigation. The FBI brings a lot to the investigation because they have access to so many tools that perhaps Pima County doesn't have. They also bring a lot of experience. I'm not saying Pima County doesn't have a lot of experience, but as we know, Pima County is a pretty nice, affluent community. And usually when you have very nice, affluent communities, there's really not that much volume of work, right? I'm not saying they're good detectives, but you become a better investigator by the volume of work, right? So when I was a detective in the squad, you're catching like 300, maybe 400 cases a year. That's a lot. And if you're investigating all that, that's a lot of experience. So, you're not born a very better investigator. It's just the work experience. So it's good. It's good that it's collaboration between the FBI.
No suspect. And now, growing concerns about the evidence. But it gets worse. Sources inside Pima County say Sheriff Chris Nanos refused to fully hand the case over to federal agents, the same federal task force that specializes in kidnappings. Why? According to former insiders, Chris Nanos has a personal grudge against the FBI. That claim alone is raising serious questions. And it doesn't stop there. The man leading this investigation reportedly secured his badge by just 481 votes. 4,180 to 1,001. In a case this serious, those margins suddenly carry weight.
Case of blocking evidence from the FBI, that's just so far from the truth.
We asked him why not send the DNA samples to the FBI's lab.
There's gloves found. So FBI says, okay, so should we send them to the FBI lab? I said, no, let's send it all to our lab. Let's just keep it all in one place. Our lab does good work. Their lab does good work. We talked to the FBI. They said, yep, makes sense. Thanks, Sheriff. And we move on to the next problem.
So you're basically saying this is maybe one person that had a problem with it, but you feel like...
You got 400 officers out there working together. They're not always going to see eye to eye.
Are you sharing the results
Everything.
with FBI?
Now, the county is facing a chilling question. Was this a kidnapping, or did it turn into a political ego war with a body attached? Stay with me, because what we uncovered next demands a closer look at everything surrounding this case. The deeper you dig into Pima County, the more disturbing the picture becomes. Chris Nanos did not simply step into this crisis. He built the department now handling it. For years ago, he barely survived one of the tightest elections in county history, holding on to his position by the slimmest of margins.
Reporter here for many years before going to New York, and I just want to make sure that the public understands that this is a mom that's missing and is of utmost importance, which is why many of my colleagues in law enforcement here had some concerns with the way the sheriff was managing this, and especially his communication or very poor communication to the public, making statements that were, well, quite frankly, just awful and incorrect, and taking actions that were incorrect as well. So a number of us decided we needed to say something about it because we did not want it to reflect on our community and the Sheriff's Department, which has been an extraordinary law enforcement agency that I worked with for 3 decades and had a national reputation.
481 votes. That is not a landslide. That is not a mandate. That is a political coin toss with a badge attached. And critics say that since that razor-thin win, the department has operated more like a war room than a sheriff's office. 3 veteran homicide detectives were reassigned. Officially, it was labeled restructuring. Unofficially, those detectives had backed Heather Lappin, the challenger who nearly took his job. Coincidence? Maybe, but these were not rookies. They were the investigators who cracked the county's toughest cold cases. The ones who understood forensic sequencing and knew how to build a case methodically, piece by piece, instead of shaping narratives at press conferences. And when Nancy Guthrie disappeared, those detectives were no longer there. Then there is the air unit.
We haven't narrowed it down to anything other than we have certain pieces of evidence that we're looking at. Case leads until you either make it or...
1 week before the kidnapping, a highly trained tactical pilot was moved out of the department. This was not a routine reassignment. The county had reportedly invested years and significant funding into his training, advanced thermal imaging, night search operations, desert terrain mapping, all of it gone and reassigned according to internal whispers over minor conduct disputes. So when Nancy Guthrie disappeared into the freezing desert darkness, Pima County did not have its most experienced aerial search operator in the sky. 3 hours passed before a fully equipped aircraft was deployed. 3 hours in a kidnapping. 3 hours where heat signatures fade, tracks vanish, and critical windows begin to close. But this is where the pressure intensifies. When federal agents offered to escalate their involvement, not just assist, but take a larger operational role, Sheriff Chris Nanos reportedly kept the investigation centralized. Control stayed local. Evidence routing stayed local. Decision-making remained tightly contained. Multiple insiders described what they call a 3-man circle. Sheriff Chris Nanos, his chief deputy, and his operations captain. And that, they say, was it.
With us once again in Tucson, Arizona. Kelly, what more are we learning about that latest news about the DNA found on a glove a couple of miles from Nancy's house?
Well, the snapshot we are getting from investigators is that there's a lot of evidence that they've been dealing with, and a glove and other gloves have been talked about a lot publicly, and they have taken testing of those. They have established DNA profile, and then they've compared it against that database that you referred to, which includes persons all across the country who've been arrested or charged or convicted with a crime. There are differing laws state by state about when someone who's taken into custody must provide their DNA. But it is a vast database, and certainly if there were a criminal history, that would be a good way to identify a potential depositor of that DNA. Then, is it in some way linked to the Guthrie case? That's another big question. So work is being done. There are hundreds of investigators who are on this case working on a stream of different types of approaches. We know, for example, that they have been canvassing gun stores in the area. Why? Because the suspect seen on that doorbell video had a weapon, had a holster that had some interesting identifying markers that authorities are trying to get a better read on. Where was it purchased? What could they learn about?
No broad task force. No outside command authority. Just 3 men steering the largest missing person investigation Pima County has ever faced. Then came the lab decision. Instead of sending critical biological evidence through the federal forensic pipeline, known for rapid DNA, profiling, and national database integration, the material was sent to a private out-of-state laboratory. Sheriff Chris Nanos said it made operational sense. Critics argued it slowed momentum. Federal sources speaking anonymously reportedly questioned the move. And while that evidence was being processed, Sheriff Chris Nanos went public. He discussed DNA challenges, investigative timelines, and even technological limitations. In most high-level investigations, such details are guarded closely. Information is leverage. The less a potential suspect knows, the better. But in Pima County, updates were frequent, and some say revealing. Meanwhile, Nancy Guthrie's family waited. Then came the reward debate. The family reportedly wanted to offer money immediately, but were advised to hold off, citing concerns about false tips and investigative noise. After nearly a month without a breakthrough, the reward was finally announced. Within 24 hours, tip lines surged. That raised another question. If public incentive generated movement, why the delay? Look at the sequence. Detectives reassigned. A tactical pilot transferred. Federal involvement limited. Evidence routed elsewhere. Sensitive details disclosed. Reward delayed. Each decision on its own might have an explanation. Taken together, they form a pattern. And in politics, Patterns matter. Remember the margin? 481 votes. That is what placed Chris Nanos in command the night Nancy Guthrie vanished. Now the focus shifts. This is no longer just about where Nancy Guthrie is. It is about whether the department meant to protect her was already strained before she ever needed protection. Then the tone changed. Inside the command center, phones were reportedly redirected, emails archived. When federal agents offered deeper involvement, they were publicly told to step aside. According to two anonymous insiders, Sheriff Chris Nanos allegedly said, "This is our county. We handle our own." The question became, handle it how? Within 48 hours of Nancy Guthrie's death being classified as under investigation, the sheriff's office issued a statement suggesting no immediate foul play was suspected. That raised eyebrows. There were sealed documents, missing digital logs, and reports that Guthrie had expressed concern about powerful individuals days before her death. An internal memo, which cannot be independently verified, allegedly suggested federal analysts found inconsistencies in the forensic timeline. Time of death estimates did not match nearby surveillance data. Traffic camera footage was reportedly corrupted when the FBI liaison requested formal access to the evidence storage. The request was said to be delayed, then rerouted for review. History added another layer. 3 years earlier, during a joint narcotics operation, Sheriff Chris Nanos reportedly clashed with federal authorities over credit and control. Insiders described that dispute as personal. So when federal agents returned offering assistance in a high-profile death, some asked, was this about jurisdiction or pride? Public reaction intensified. Local radio questioned the timeline. Online forums dissected every press conference. A former deputy speaking anonymously reportedly said, "If the feds come in, everything gets audited. Every log, every call, every decision." Then came another development. Sources close to Heather Lappin, Nancy Guthrie's legal advisor, suggested Guthrie had been compiling information related to alleged financial irregularities within county leadership that took her. That allegation remains unproven, but if even partially accurate, it shifts the conversation toward motive. Soon after the funeral, an internal complaint was reportedly filed against Sheriff Chris Nanos by someone within his own department. The allegation, procedural interference and selective evidence prioritization. Around the same time, investigative journalist Aaron Cross claimed he received an anonymous warning to stop digging into the case. Security enhancements. Public trust began to crumble. County council members grew cautious. Requests for an independent autopsy review entered administrative consideration. A former county official publicly called for a state-level probe, warning that when transparency becomes optional, democracy becomes fragile. Most concerning were claims from a digital forensic analyst who alleged that metadata on key evidence files showed access times inconsistent with official reports. If true, that would raise serious chain of custody concerns. Sheriff Chris Nanos has dismissed the controversy as online sensationalism and irresponsible speculation. Still, observers noted his tone during recent briefings. Shorter answers, sharper responses, a brief pause when asked about personal conflicts with federal agencies. Now, Pima County waits for audits, for possible subpoenas, for clarity. This case is no longer only about how Nancy Guthrie died. It is about who controls the narrative surrounding her death. Nancy Guthrie is gone. Sheriff Chris Nanos is under scrutiny. The county is divided. The question lingering in the air is not only what happened, but who benefits from how it happened. And as the silence grows louder, so do the demands for answers.